Thanks, Josh. And one thing I would say is don't underestimate how much information you can impart whilst exchanging 4-year-olds under high pressure when they're really hungry. It makes you very efficient. As just said, kia ora koutou, ko Ruth toko ingoe. So I run Ruth & Co, which is a content agency based here in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington. Before I get started though, I've got some questions for you, just so I can find out a bit more about you. Who here works in development or engineering? Great, because this talk was originally aimed at you, so that's excellent. So at least half the audience. Who works in something? Design, visual design, UX design? Okay, hopefully still relevant. Content? Definitely relevant. Good. I was slightly worried that we might have loads of left field disciplines like Josh, in which case that might have been a bit harder to service, but I think we'll be okay. And another question for you. Given everything that's going on at the moment, who here feels like this a lot of the time? Definitely me, which is, a big relief. And that is definitely how it feels to be working in content at the moment. And on the surface, some of us look very calm. We're just calmly doing what we've always done, which is advocating for customer-focused content on every channel. But underneath, I don't know about you, but I am furiously scrabbling to come up to speed with things like what agents need from your website content to act autonomously, or how you should structure your website content for Claude or ChatGPT, or how you can use AI to streamline processes, especially to get rid of the boring bits that you've been doing for 20 years that you don't want to do anymore. So probably like all of us here, content professionals, we're all grappling with what AI means for our mahi or our work. And if we're grappling with it, then it affects the way that we work with every other discipline as well, and it affects how we all work with you. So I've been working in digital content a very long time, nearly 20 years now, which does feel like a lifetime in this particular discipline. And when I started out, I started out writing species descriptions, so I can tell you a lot about ferns and a lot about dolphins. That's how I got into digital content. But we were really writing content for humans, one web page at a time. Then we started designing content for search engines, and Lana talked a little bit about this earlier. Back in the day, we were stuffing content with keywords, which was quite an obnoxious way to behave. Now we're doing search engine optimization with a bit more sophistication. Then we started optimizing content for mobile, so short, sweet, scannable, easy to read on a short screen. Then we started thinking about more content as components, so more visual content design. And Emma earlier talked about how content and design systems can really work together. And then we started working more in structured content, or at least a few organizations did, in order to enable reuse across systems. Those organizations must be delighted right now. Gold star for them for seeing the future. And then now, obviously, as well as humans and search engines, we're optimizing for AI. So a developer, of which I'm glad there are a few of you in the room, recently told me that they wanted to understand how content work has changed and what it means for their relationship with content teams. I actually thought that was a really great question. So this talk is really just aimed at that one developer who asked me that question, and hopefully all of you will find something relevant in it too. So most of the people I work with through my organization are large organizations. They're wrangling an enormous amount of complexity, either on one large website, more commonly several large websites, often across multiple channels. And for those organizations, like I said, we used to design content for websites and search engines. Now we're designing it for AI too, whether that's generative or agentic on an owned channel like a chatbot or a non-owned channel like Claude or ChatGPT. That's the third audience. And organizations need to serve all three audiences simultaneously to meet people wherever they are. That means that increasingly as content professionals, we need to understand the interrelationship between content and tech. We are increasingly dependent on each other to succeed. Content relies on architecture to deliver, but building a good architecture relies on really sound content decisions. And these are shared decisions that still, even after 20 years, much to my sadness, are sometimes still made in separate rooms. So my question for everyone here is, do you want to inherit those decisions? Or like me, do you want to shape those decisions together? Let me show you some examples of what I mean. So one of the things that I'm particularly wondering at the moment with one of my clients is how we need to structure our content so it can be used effectively by AI. The UK Government Digital Service, and Lana, I know you mentioned them earlier, we absolutely love them. They built an AI chatbot recently that draws on, I think it's about 100,000 web pages of different content from different domains in the UK government, so health, tax, education, things like that. And it recombines those separate different web pages to answer questions like, I've had a baby, what help am I entitled to? And the intent is eventually to move this to an agentic tool that enables people to take action in that interface as well as just getting information. That project is in beta at the moment. It's obviously taken them quite a long while to get there, and they're intending it to roll it out more fully later in the year. In doing this project, they found something quite interesting, and they said gov.uk chat can only be as good as the content published on gov.uk, so its source. Clear and accurate content results in better answers. This is what I'm seeing in a variety of locations and with my clients as well. Content structure and quality directly determines AI response quality. And we're increasingly seeing data that supports this. I saw one stat recently that suggests structured content can reduce AI hallucinations by up to 60%, which is huge. Out of date, duplicate, fragmented, poorly structured content, all of that surfaces as confusing answers or unclear answers. This means that content design really matters for AI success. You can't just stick a rag over the top of a crappy content set and expect that it will work, because it won't. It will surface things that are unclear and it will bring risk to your organisation. The gov.uk chatbot really worked when those content and technical teams worked together, and they worked together on things like, what content do we have? How should we surface it? How should it be structured? How do we prioritise it for inclusion? This means that content is infrastructure now. It is structured, it is durable, it's foundational to AI success. And just like other kinds of infrastructure, it really benefits when different disciplines work together to bring their knowledge and expertise to it. This is what I see with my clients at the moment, over and over again. So everyone wants this easy to understand and accessible content for AI systems. And people want to structure large content sets so that it can be reused both within a website and also for AI, because you can see kind of AI generation as just another form of reuse, really. To improve that output, though, it means reducing duplication, it means giving content meaningful labels, and it means treating content much more like data, so a single source of truth. That's not just publishing content for humans to read on a web page, it's publishing it and structuring it in a way that it can be recombined by different machines into different answers. All of that, as soon as you start to treat content like data, it starts requiring technical input as well as content input. So where does that content get housed? Where is it stored? Where is it published? Who is authoring it? And those kinds of conversations obviously need technical people at the table. Otherwise, as content people, we're making decisions around things like metadata and labels and reuse, where content gets reused and why, what we prioritize for AI delivery, what the standards might be for AI. But obviously all of those things impact on tech as well, like the CMS design, the architecture, where the content should be stored. And for everyone working with organizations with a large content set, this is coming for everyone soon. And each of these decisions that you can see here, they directly affect the other set. They're definitely best shaped together. You can probably see that I am definitely the kind of person who likes a corridor or a conversation, and I like to work really collaboratively. I also like to be asked questions, so please do ask them at the end. But if you're working with a content team, you can ask them things like, what content would you like to create once and reuse? What content should we prioritize for AI? How would treating content as data change what you need from the CMS or making it reusable? Then together you can have the conversation that builds the systems to support that content. I'll give you another example now, which I promise is not as boring as the title Governance and Processes suggests. We can use AI to enforce governance and to improve processes. And that's where everyone's influence grows, whatever your discipline is. It's in those governance discussions that your senior stakeholders are having, boring as they may be. I'm working with one client at the moment, who's a government agency in Aotearoa, they've got 22 content processes and they all operate independently. And we call that, unaffectionately, the jellyfish. It's like lots of little independent tentacles, none of them are talking to each other, and they just move inexorably to this blob of a website that is drifting in the current. It's a wild metaphor, but I'm rolling with it for now. The result of those 22 little tentacles operating independently is they've got thousands and thousands of pages of content and PDFs, and they're duplicated and they're fragmented and they are in, frankly, a write state. And it was very difficult for people and machines to use them. Internal technical teams want to be involved because they can see the opportunities for streamlining all these workflows, of which there are many, but because there's no centralized governance, there's no way for them to easily have those conversations. Governance and process decisions directly determine what developers are asked to build and maintain. So if, as in this example, we're thinking about consolidating those 22 processes into fewer, that changes your CMS requirements for workflow, for example. If governance and process groups decide they're going to make a subset of content reusable, that changes the way the CMS needs to be architected. If we might use AI in content production to enforce some style standards, and again, Emma talked about this earlier, because you could do that in Drupal potentially, that changes your CMS requirements as well. If people aren't in the room when those decisions are made, you're inheriting those decisions that other people have shaped, that affect the work that you do. I'll give you another example. So we talked a little bit about style guides earlier. Content teams are increasingly creating style guides that are readable by AI. Previously, it used to be a group of people like me who loved words, would nerd out on them, make a big PDF document, no one else ever read them. This is an example from MailChimp, which actually, generally speaking, isn't bad as style guides go. But you can see from the things I've underlined there, very difficult to make it machine readable. Like, what does "we prefer winking to shouting" mean when it comes to tone and voice? And what is weird but not inappropriate? That feels like a life goal, but possibly not one that you might want to write to. Increasingly, we're going to make these machine readable, which actually will be better for humans as well, because I'd find it very difficult to write to that. So here's an example from the work Akama, which Josh is from, has been doing with the Parliamentary Council Office. They are the legislative nerds who write Aotearoa's legislation. You can see in this style guide, there's some guidance that says, convert negative constructions to positive equivalents. And it gives examples of what bad and good looks like here. And you could imagine other examples too, which might be like, for readability, we keep sentences short. Maybe you keep them under 25 words. Or we don't use jargon, and then you give examples of we use these words and not these words. Those kinds of rules and concrete examples are what makes the style guides machine readable. AI tools can check against those specific rules automatically rather than interpreting vague guidance like weird but not inappropriate. So content teams, like me, can write the rules. We love the words. We can define the examples. But how those rules get enforced, whether that's through a CMS workflow or validation, whether it's through AI-assisted content review, or it might be integration with authoring tools, that becomes a technical question. The design of both the rules and the system needs to happen in governance, not after those decisions get made. And then that way you can design the system together. You can see here that, much like the previous example, we've got decisions that are being made about things like streamlining processes, or what the rules should be, or where AI fits in content production, or when you delete content, if you hopefully do delete content. And again, the technical team is working out really the how of those things. Doing those things together makes them a huge amount better. Again, governance is where you move from inheriting those decisions to shaping them. And ideally, you'd be able to ask your content team things like, where do you want to save time with content creation? And I can guarantee you we do want to save time with content creation. We've been doing this a long time. It can get quite boring doing the same review over and over again. What parts of content creation do you do repeatedly, and how do you review content currently? Then a final example would be, how can we shape our platforms, whatever those platforms might be, for the third audience of AI? So I never thought I'd show an example with code, vague code that I had written, but this is what content work looks like in 2026. So I'm working with an organisation at the moment that's rebuilding their CMS. So what I'm doing is running content analysis in Claude to understand what they have. So where the duplication is, what content is a candidate for a reusable component, what can be consolidated. The experience director, the technical director, and I are all working on that together. So I go off and I do the analysis and then we review the findings together. The content analysis directly shapes the solution architecture and the CMS design more broadly. In that particular example of the content analysis, it revealed semantic duplication. So that's not exact copies. It's where you've got things where the meaning is the same, but the wording has drifted over time. For example, it might be things like the same medical guidance written in lots of different ways. That can be a challenge for humans and machines, because as a human, if you're reading multiple pages, you don't know which one is quite right. As a machine, you're kind of synthesizing that all together, and it can be a little bit of a mess. It's also got risk associated with it, especially with things like medicine, legislation, all of those kinds of things, because you need a single canonical source. From the CMS perspective, you might have 5 pages and they look like distinct content types because they've all got a name, they've all got different content in there. But from a human and a machine perspective, they're actually the same thing. Once you combine the machine analysis with the experience design analysis, then you can start identifying candidates for genuine reusable content, single sources of truth that can be maintained once, used across many contexts. So that content analysis shows us all the what, and the tech shows us the how. So our tech director is translating those findings into architecture decisions, things like what might become a shared content component in the CMS, who can edit those components, can they be editable more broadly, or are they only editable in a single source? And I do work with another organisation who would love this kind of technical input, but the team just don't have capacity. And what that does mean is the content team are making decisions that the technical team are going to inherit later. So when you shape decisions together, it is definitely better outcomes for everyone. The content analysis informs the architecture, the technical and expertise informs the content choices. And neither side can get there on its own, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. So my ask today, if your organisation is rebuilding a CMS, or it's restructuring content, or it's thinking about how to integrate AI into its workflows, are we making decisions about content and engineering together? And that's because we've seen that content structure directly shapes how well AI systems perform, and content structure definitely impacts on the technical architecture. Content governance groups are making decisions that determine what needs to be built, and technical input makes those decisions infinitely better. And when content and tech and all of the other disciplines shape the direction together before building, we build the right thing the first time. So, as I said, I do love a conversation, and these are just some example questions, and I promise you that your team will be excited and happy to answer them. But you can ask things like, how can we make our content more accurate when it's consumed by AI? Love this one. How can I help you get rid of the boring work you don't enjoy from your content processes? And where are you using AI in your workflow that we could build for and integrate? And that way, together, we can create success. Thank you. No words for you, Josh. Not today.
Well, I have about 4 questions, so I would encourage other people to ask their questions, which I'm sure are popping up. Is there a hand? Does anyone have a question?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask one thing found with development structured data, and we can include schema.org metadata with the content. We can say this is the person, they have this name, this is their photo, that kind of thing. I just wondered if you had an opinion on using structured metadata such as schema.org data with.
Yeah, weirdly there was an article about schema.org today, so it's a timely question. It's deprecated some of its schemas, but then it has added new ones as well. I think at the moment, this is my gut feel, schema.org will remain relevant and is extremely useful because Google still really appreciates schema.org. That's my understanding. However, ideally you supplement that with your own organization's taxonomy, particularly if you're in an organization with a large content set or a specialist domain, maybe like health, tax, education. Supplementing things like schema.org or other established metadata with your own organizational taxonomy means that the content is then more easily consumed by machines. I'll give you one specific example. I'm working with an organization at the moment that has to present information from the past 7 years worth of legislation, even if the legislation has changed each year. So you can imagine as a human, quite difficult to make sure that sometimes you're on the right page. Even more difficult if you put your question into AI and it's recombining 7 years worth of legislation into one. If you apply some metadata behind that where you say this is from, 2020, go to 2026 for the most relevant version or recent version, that will make your content much more accurate and easier to consume. Anyway, I'm a big fan of metadata, actually quite hard to implement a taxonomy successfully, but very important.
Yeah, thanks for your talk, that was awesome. Can I ask for perhaps similar to the same question I asked content is sort of like, maybe a reason why there's so many engineers in the room, is that content's sort of becoming more a part of software delivery with instruction to AIs.
Yeah.
And we're seeing like a lot of markdown files now sitting inside of Git repositories, and that's becoming an instruction for how a program is going to function. And then, as you kind of alluded to, that's now happening on the web where AIs are reading the content that are arriving and we're following that procedurally to figure out how to do that. So I guess one question I have for you is about if you looked at, say, like the agent skills specification, how that can inform style writing and structure. But secondarily, you also talked about applications and governance specifically. You sort of alluded to things like style guides, which are kind of loosely rules for an AI to apply with it. It's kind of like nature. Politics and government law is also a kind of a rule book. It's something to operate within.
Yes.
And so it's another specification sorts that you can derive information from. In some ways, the content we run on websites is just really a transformation of this information. So have you thought about how you can take your style guides and use them to produce the content in a sort of autonomous pipeline from into legislation into published content?
Lordy, that is a big question, but a great one. Okay. Yes, I do have lots of thoughts about that. That'd probably be an entire afternoon's worth of talk. Just to go to the legislation only, and I know Josh has got lots of experience at this working with the Parliamentary Council Office. In order to translate your legislation effectively into content, you need business rules. Some government agencies are really good with their business rules and they're clear and explicit. If you've got clear and explicit business rules, much easier to make them into content that humans can understand. If you do not have clear and explicit business rules about, say, your eligibility thresholds for a given entitlement or something like that, much more difficult to translate autonomously from legislation into content. Business rules tend to sit outside content scope, but it is absolutely the point at which your content designer butts up against the organization, and that's the kind of messy grey area that most organizations need to solve in order to make their content either autonomously or mean, for example, what gov.uk did. Hang on, let me explain a different example. The Ukraine has got a really great agentic chatbot, surprisingly. And one of the reasons it did that is because all of its business rules across the entire country are explicit and codified, and that's what enables it to produce content generatively. And then when it comes to style guides, yes, you can definitely make those machine readable. Ideally, they're agnostic of whatever AI tool you choose, so that if as an organization you move from, Copilot to Claude or use something like Ditto, you can move your style guide along with it into whatever system or tooling you have. I hope that was a good 2-minute answer to an extremely large question, but it was a good question.
The keyword that I was curious about was you talked about centralized content, and most organizations are feudalistic and possibly Robert Baron-like in terms of decision making and power.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about like just the nuance of how tech could like not run out of hours in the day consulting with the business, how content can find some way to centralize, kind of rather than trying to figure out which of these three people is the decision maker inside an organisation. Sorry, that's probably an unsolvable question. But
Yeah. Always the people are the hardest and the best things. I think it depends on your team's mandate, really. So I've worked with some organisations where content has a really strong mandate and therefore is quite centralised in terms of both the governance and the execution. If content isn't well regarded or is maybe an afterthought, then it tends to be much more feudalistic, to your point. One of my hopes is that with AI and the fact that content is the necessary context for AI to perform well,